So, Lone Rider here, and I just wanted to throw this out there. Are there households in America where people actually watch CNN anymore? Um, the reason this came to mind is I actually don't think that I've ever had CNN on in my house. I mean, I've probably seen it, when I'm like in a waiting room somewhere or something, but I don't think I've ever had it on in my house at all that I can remember. And my news viewing habits have always been very particular. I remember going back to the early 1990s when I was a young teenager in high school. I stopped watching Channel 4, NBC, which we'd grown up with. You know, Al Roker and Janice Huff doing the weather, and Len Berman spanning the world in sports, and Chuck Scarborough, and all those guys. And we had invited them into our home constantly, and we had trusted them. And they did this rabidly anti-gun program. I want to say it was called the Guns of November. I'm not even really sure. But I just noticed, even at the age of 15 or 16, I noticed that it was just so totally biased. And I made a decision right then and there that I wasn't going to watch NBC anymore. It wasn't so much a boycott. I mean, it's not like I told anybody I was doing this. I just chose not to watch NBC anymore. And I haven't watched them at all since then. I mean, I might have seen them while flipping through the channel, but I don't go to them for news anymore, and I haven't since I was 16. So just a word of warning: that's how easy it is to lose a viewer. One biased program, and you can lose a viewer for life. But the point is that we were inviting these people into our home every day, me and my family, as I was growing up. And by the time, again, I was 15 or 16, I had done enough research and knew enough about the subject to realize that while we were trusting them and inviting them into our home, they weren't repaying that trust. So I stopped watching them. And as far as CNN, I really don't think, honestly, that I ever watched it. I mean, it might have been on TV when I was like 12 or something. My folks might have had it on, but I honestly don't recall ever having it on as an adult or even a teenager that I can remember. But so my mom's was visiting and she couldn't figure out the channels, so she actually turned on the TV to CNN. I remember I came into the kitchen tonight and I was like, "Well, what is this on the TV? Like why are we watching this?" And she said, "Well, I couldn't figure out the numbers for the other stuff, so I just put this on." I was looking at it and I was like, "Really?" I mean, it was literally like watching news from an alternate universe, how they presented things. And in a way, I'm kind of glad it happened. The sort of accident of happenstance that led to me actually watching CNN for the first time as an adult. But the truth is that I was literally incredulous. And it wasn't so much about the political bias. I mean, I'm sort of, I guess you could say, libertarian with a small L. So I do tend to lean more towards the Republican and the Democrat on some things. But it wasn't the political bias, oddly enough. Everybody says political bias is the issue, whether they're talking Fox News or CNN. They're like, well, they've all got their bias. To me, it wasn't that. Like, I can work around a political bias if I at least know where it sits. But it was the logical fallacies and the incoherencies. It was because they had a political bias, the people commenting on the news, and they were commenting on the news, not reporting it, of course, were literally saying things that didn't make sense. Right? Now, other news channels do that too, Fox News in particular. They all have a bias and they all comment on the news. But what I found so amazing about the CNN people that were on the news tonight, October 5th, and in particular, they were talking a lot about this thing with Kavanaugh and the accusations and all of that, which I don't want to get into right now in particular, but it was just the things they were saying. You could tell the things they were saying were motivated by a political ideology, but that wasn't my problem with it. If you're honest about having a political ideology and people know where you stand, like Tucker Carlson on Fox News, everybody knows he does a political commentary show, not just a straight news show. Everybody knows that. And they're okay with that because he's like open about that's what he's doing. These people were pretending to do like a straight news show, but it was all commentary. And the funny part was the commentary was intellectually incoherent. That was my problem. Even if somebody has a bias, you can still have a intellectually coherent commentary along the lines of that bias. But when it's intellectually incoherent, when the bias is so great that it actually leads you to say things that don't make sense because your only guiding principle is the bias and not even trying to appear coherent to your audience, that was what was so telling. It wasn't like I was watching it and saying, my God, these people have a far left political bias. I would expect that of CNN, just as like I would expect Fox News to have a right of center political bias. It was that what they were saying did not make sense. It wasn't like, oh my God, they have a bias. It was like they are literally incoherent. Like they're saying one thing and then they're contradicting it, and then and obviously they were doing that because of their political bias. But the point is that political bias is one thing, coherency is another. You can have a political bias as long as people know about it. It's not a bad thing necessarily. Obviously, there's a place for that in the newspapers. It used to be called the editorial page. Now, of course, it overflows into the rest of the news. But okay, people have a political opinion. That's one thing. Then there's the straight news. Hopefully there's some barrier. Not always. Okay, but even if the actual straight news is going to be delivered with a political tilt, at least within the framework of your own bias, you can still be coherent. It doesn't mean that the bias isn't there. We always have to be, aware of it. But the point is that at least if they can be coherent within the framework of their own tilt. And what I was seeing was just intellectual incoherency, statements contradicting each other. The same people who were saying, like with the Kavanaugh hearings, the Republicans wanted to rush everything, but then none of them were addressing the issue that what was her name, Dianne Feinstein, sat on the letter from Kavanaugh's accuser for 2 weeks. It's like, on one hand, you're saying the Republicans were rushing everything. On the other hand, you're saying, you're not saying a single thing about, they wasted literally almost a month's time or half a month's time, several weeks' time. It's like, and then we need an FBI investigation. And then, the FBI investigation didn't turn out what we wanted, so we don't trust the FBI investigation. And, you were limiting the FBI investigation. But on the other hand, we wanted it done. And the incoherency was enough to make my head explode. We need to trust the FBI. Trust the FBI. Oh, they didn't get the results we want. We can't trust them. They're political. And my God, right? I mean, I'm okay with there being a bias in the news at this point in my life. I think I've wrapped my mind around the fact that everybody's got a political agenda. I wish it wasn't so, but I think we can all know that that's the way it is. And you know what? If we all keep an eye out for that and try to just watch both sides, we can kind of work around it. But having a bias is different from having an intellectual incoherency. These people were literally, it was like watching a Tower of Babel, okay? It was like watching a bunch of 12-year-olds high on meth, okay? It was gobbledygook. It didn't make any fracking sense. And I actually turned to my, like I said, my folks were visiting. I actually turned to my folks and I said, I don't think I've ever watched CNN before. And then I said something to the effect of, and I said this with a straight face. I was like, are there actually households in America where people like watch this on a routine basis and give it credence and think this is the news? And they were like, yeah. And I was like, even though they don't make sense, even though they're contradicting themselves all the time, even though they're like they literally, it's like a bunch of 12-year-olds on meth. And they were like, yeah, there's lots of people out there who watch this. And all I could think of, the next thing that came out of my mouth were, do they have some kind of mental problem? Have they all eaten paint as kids? I mean, what explains that? No answer. Nobody knew. My folks couldn't say. I can't say. I honestly don't know. And if you watch CNN, I'm not trying to insult you. I'm just saying what I saw on the newscast tonight, October 5th, 2018, and maybe it's different other nights. Maybe this Supreme Court thing pushed everybody over the edge with partisanship. I don't know. Maybe CNN isn't normally this bad. But for the first time in my life, I inadvertently ended up watching CNN around supper time when they had the news on. And what I saw was literally, again, intellectual incoherence. And again, bias is one thing. You can work around it. You can acknowledge that it's there. That's one thing. But literally, intellectual incoherence. Not even realizing when you're contradicting yourself, when you're saying something that doesn't make any sense, when you're literally making an arse out of yourself on national TV in front of millions and millions and millions of people. And all I could think of, like, there are people who actually watch this on a daily basis. I found it painful to watch while I was eating pizza. Could you imagine if you were actually focused on this and paying more than, I was only paying, I think, about a third of my attention to it. I was skimming a newspaper and eating pizza, and this happened to be on TV. And some of the things I heard were so absurd, I put down the newspaper and I focused on the TV. But I was still eating and doing other things. Could you imagine if you were just watching this and like, how do you watch it and not see the contradictions, the absurdities, I don't know. I mean, again, literally, I have to ask, are there households in this country where people actually watch this on a regular basis and not for the comedic element, but actually for serious news? I find that very hard to believe. But anyway, it was a learning experience, and I don't think I'll ever do it again, but I'm kind of glad it happened. If there are a lot of people out there who actually watch it, I guess it explains a lot. Lone Roger.